That's some sweet, sweet intro music.
I know.
I assume.
I love that.
Turn that up in my headphones.
Oh, yeah. Well, welcome to everyone watching, and especially those watching live for this recording, where we've got a collab going, an impromptu collab between me as a representative of Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast, and I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, but not Charles, who is usually my co-host, because he wasn't able to make it tonight. But I'm lucky to be joined by Hannah and Laura from On Wednesdays We Read podcast. So yeah, welcome, y'all.
Thanks so much. We're ready to talk some fantasy with our friends as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much for inviting us on, Dylan.
Yes, I'm really happy that you all were able to make it. And we're here to discuss a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is as a person who's done my share of rereading my favorite fantasy novels, we're going to be talking about our top fantasy book recommendations for books that we feel are worth rereading. So we've got a really exciting list of books to talk about. And these are the books that a lot of times get even better the second time or even the third time around.
I can honestly say that I'm not a huge rereader, so this is a little bit of a difficult topic, but I have many books that I think people should reread. So
Hannah will oblige me every now and then, and she'll do a reread with me, like a buddy read, if it's like my birthday or something.
Right. Well, when it comes to Hannah, do as she says, not as she does. All right.
Exactly. Thank you. That's how I live my life.
All right. And Laura, where do you stand on rereading? Sounds like
you know what?
more
I
of a rereader than Hannah.
In the middle of a reread, so I guess firmly approve.
Oh.
Nice. I also firmly approve. And yeah, we've got a nice list. We'll all come in and offer our own. I can start. I mean, it's I'll probably start with a book that at the very least I know Hannah can relate to. And
I bet I can guess it, Dylan.
You think you can guess it?
I think if you gave me 3 guesses, it would be The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Look at that. You didn't even need 3 guesses. You needed 1 total guess. It is going to be The Name of the Wind. The whole Kingkiller Chronicle, if we're being honest. And this is a series by Patrick Rothfuss. I'm starting with a heavy hitter. We'll get to a few deeper cuts for sure as we move through this. But this one for me is one that I've reread over and over and over again. And I think probably the number one reason is that it's just got absolutely incredible prose. Like Patrick Rothfuss, he's come out with 2 books, 2 novellas as well, one pretty recently. And you can tell why perhaps that 3rd book has been taking well over a decade and who knows how long to get done, because every single sentence is so perfectly honed and crafted. And I really appreciate that. It's for anyone not aware of the Kingkiller Chronicle, it's basically the story of a legendary wizard named Quoth, who is telling his stories, frame stories, what they call it, of how he came to be this legendary wizard, and also how he ended up by the start of the book being just a humble innkeeper in a small town. It is 2 books out, 3rd book who knows when. And one of the fun things about that is you get endless speculation on the reread as well, where like at first you're just following all of the plot and letting that beautiful Rothfuss prose just wash over you. But on the second read, you start noticing some of the foreshadowing and where that's coming in, and you also can engage with a very excited community very excited to get that third book. Perhaps a little impatient, but people, I mean, there's like a King Killer subreddit where people just speculate and analyze this over and over and over again. And there's also an unreliable narration element to it, which I think is really fun to try to pick apart, especially we don't have the thing yet. And on the reread, you might notice some inconsistencies in Quoth's story on how everything played out. And yeah, all that, in addition to, of course, the fact that you want to stay super fresh on these two books. So read them over and over again, because you just never know. Third book could be coming out tomorrow for all we know. Probably not. I think there would be a little bit more of a
who knows. Does Patrick Rothfuss know?
Like, so timely if that book came out tomorrow. What's the date? January 24th. If that comes out on the 25th, Dylan is a wizard.
You wish you reread that book already, Hannah. So no, I love that book series. I have read both books as well. That was one of the first books like I read back when I was getting back into reading. And I remember I didn't know too much about it going into it. I didn't know that there was like a mysterious third book. And it was just fun to read. I thought I really liked the unreliable narrator. I really liked the world building, the prose, as you said, and just like the deep characters that you really never know what to expect with them. I also think that the speculation of what Patrick Rothfuss has planned next is interesting, because it kind of reminds me of back when like Game of Thrones hadn't been finished and everyone was speculating like, ooh, do you know about this theory? Do you know about this theory? And the King Killer Chronicles definitely has that like repeat energy of people just super excited to see who's going to be right and what's going to come next. Even if Patrick Rothfuss is going to tease everyone and be like, it's not coming out unless I think it's good, so stop bothering me about it. So
I will just say, if anyone has not checked out Patrick Rothfuss's reviews of children's books on Goodreads, do yourself a favor and go check those out. They're amazing, especially his Eloise review. That was fantastic.
If you're dying for some Rothfuss writing, that's your next stop, guys. Don't
go there now.
Don't sleep.
It is less of a commitment. Yeah, no, he's got a very interesting voice, and it just anything that he writes between author's notes, reviews, or of course his novels, it just shines through. And you do see there's this sort of meandering way that, especially by the second book, The Wise Man's Fear, that Rothfuss writes, but it's super enjoyable because he's just got such an incredible voice and such incredible prose, and his reviews are kind of the same way. It's like you'll see him just like go off in tangent as like some personal story that has nothing to do with the book, and then he'll wrap it back in just the most perfect way. So, huge fan of Rothfuss and those books.
Good to know.
Well, I have one for a reread option. It's probably like the most basic one ever, but I'm currently listening to it. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am currently listening to the audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis, and I cannot say enough good things about this audiobook. It is fantastic. I highly recommend people check out that form. It's like listening to a movie, and the book by itself is just wonderful, but when you add Andy Serkis into this, it takes it to a whole nother level.
Well, I can admit that I have read The Hobbit and I did really like The Hobbit, but I have said recently on our podcast that I am not the best Tolkien fan of them all. And I do
Dylan ejector
for that. Pick me out of this stream right now. Because I only recently read the entire trilogy and I think I just haven't learned to love it as much as everyone else does. But I should probably check out the audiobooks because Laura really loves those.
Yes, you need to.
Well, regarding the trilogy, I'll say it's too bad Charles isn't here because he's the huge Tolkien head. Because I actually didn't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy until like toward the start of our podcast, where I just felt like they would take away my fantasy podcaster's license if I didn't read the books. Like, of course, I'd seen the movies, which are great rewatches, by the way. I don't know if rewatches count, but
absolutely.
Yeah, so, but the books can be a little like dense and feel of their time, but of course they're classics. Got CM Kaplan saying Hannah just needs to read the Silmarillion and then she'll
that's
warm up.
what I need to do.
That sounds like a good starting point for anyone who wants to get
really
into
what's
Tolkien's
gonna
works.
turn me into a lover of that.
But The Hobbit is super accessible and makes a lot of sense as a reread, especially you have me wanting to check out the Andy Serkis.
It's so good. He sings the songs. Oh, it's fantastic.
I do genuinely love I remember I read the first Lord of the Rings and I was like, I don't know, it's not really my style in high school. And my dad was like, read The Hobbit, you'll like that one. And I did very much enjoy that one. So
yeah, I mean, it's like, I think that a lot of the books that I thought of, not including Rolfus's work, are a little bit shorter, a little bit easier reads, because sometimes like I have no intention, sorry, big Tolkien heads, which is definitely not what that fan base is called. I have no intention of rereading those books. It is more of like I'm glad I read this for the context and understanding all that.
Hashtag Tolkien heads.
So you could keep your fantasy card.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't want that fantasy card to get revoked. So
no.
Well, I can go next on one of my favorites. It's a recent one that we did on the pod, and I actually reread the first book for it, the Greenbone Saga. I adore these books. They're by Fonda Lee. They're a trilogy. It is like more modern, like parallel world type fantasy, where you have people in John Loon who it's a country that is similar to, I believe, Japan. And they have like different powers when they use jade that makes them have like stronger abilities. They're stronger, faster, but there's a lot of like real world elements to it. Fonda Lee worked in, Laura, please correct me if I'm wrong, but finance. And so her world building is spot on when it comes to like using jade as a commodity in like a real world area where there's politics and there's people trying to trade and people trying to smuggle things outside the country. And it's all surrounded in like a very mafia-esque family. And I adored that series. I thought it was so wonderfully done. And the third book especially like hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting, because it's a type of book that you don't think a lot of people will go to for a trilogy. And I thought it was just so effective. And I can't wait to reread those, even though I'm not a huge rereader, because they're just so excellent. And to see like the foreshadowing, because Fonda Lee is just such an excellent writer. So
if you're ready to be hurt again, go ahead and read those books a second time.
Right. And then we have in the comments, the clan is my blood and the pillar is its master. So
yeah, that's a fantastic series. And I think one of Fonda's greatest talents is she's really willing to just let herself go when it comes to the world building. And she builds what feels like a really believable culture and thinks through all of like, what would be the economic effects of having jade involved here, and like I think that's something that is really great upon a reread, is to really, you can kind of take a step back from focusing on like, what's going to happen next in this plot, especially something as tense as a lot of stuff that's happening in the Greenbone Saga, and just be like, oh, wow, that's really cool how she set that up. And I believe that you all have interviewed Fonda Lee.
Yes, we made her apologize for her crimes against the Greenbone clan.
We also got her on the pod twice, so we didn't scare her away the first time. After
friend of the pod, we love Fonda Lee.
Friend of the pod who spends most of her time apologizing when she's on the pod. But
she owes us.
That's how you know the book is good. If you have to spend... Yeah, the author has to apologize immediately.
Raise your hand if you've been personally victimized by Fonda Lee.
Right.
Everyone.
Everyone in the room.
I think it'd be interesting on a reread too, because all of the characters in that series are so morally gray, to see how you feel about the characters a second time through.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Hilo is one of the great characters
Yes.
of modern fantasy, I feel like. And another interesting thing is how the time frame of those books are like I've never really seen that before, where a book basically goes over or a series goes over the course of just decades, at least in
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other examples, but none come to mind.
But it does it so seamlessly over the course of 3
Yeah.
books, which is, I think, because I think other books do it, but it's usually over like a longer time span. And this one's like, nope, you're going to get snapshots and you're going to know that stuff happened while you were not here. So,
Right. And you get to, on the reread, you're like reading about characters that are just children, and you're like, I know this character as an adult and exactly what they're like.
and I don't like them very much.
Right. Right now, they're just an innocent child, so
Yeah.
I can't hate them.
Never grow up.
Well, all right, let's get to a book that I want to make sure I talk about, because we actually had you on the podcast to discuss a book that I reread in anticipation of said podcast episode. Oh my!
Oh,
you see it? I don't
what?
want the thumbs down.
Oh, that's so rude. I loved that. Oh, thank
Yeah,
you. Yes.
2 thumbs up. Wait, hold on. 2 thumbs up. It's gonna do fireworks.
Oh, that's
wacky?
so fun. I wish.
Yeah.
Your computer is smarter than mine. So
I actually hate it because it, disrupts the flow of whatever we're trying to do. Like when I'm talking about how great a book is, and then it just has a thumbs down up
When
here.
that's an award-winning book
Piranesi's great
for women's fiction. Like,
yeah, that's how I feel about this.
wow, Don.
No, I know. No, but in fact, I actually feel more like this about Piranesi, and it's so this one's interesting. I think you probably haven't had the chance to reread it yet. I imagine.
No, but I have forced at least 2 people to read that book after we finished reading it. Yeah.
I gave it to 2 people for Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, this book, it's just a really beautifully written book with fantastic prose, and also just it throws you into this mysterious world of a labyrinth that is just seemingly endless and mystical, and you're in the head of a character who is like writing journal entries, basically, and while he knows a lot about how to survive in this labyrinth, he doesn't really know a lot of what's going on at the start of the book. Yeah. And it's very slowly, well, I mean, as much as it can in a relatively small book, it slowly unfurls and you start to understand what's going on. You just get these little hints. And you're like, oh, that guy, I don't trust that guy. And there's a little bit of the unreliable narrator thing going here, but more from the sense of like, he doesn't know what's going on, rather than something like Quoth, where it's like, this guy is just making stuff up. The character in this one is actually, I think, like relatively innocent in how he comes off, but you get this sense of the phrase I learned back in Mr. Miller's English class was, I believe, dramatic irony, right? That's when the viewer or reader, knows something that the character does not know. And like in very few books is it stronger than in Piranesi, because the main character knows so little. And then you come back and you get to really get a whole new perspective on what's going on by nature of like knowing what is the actual deal with this labyrinth, knowing perhaps how he got there, knowing more things about the one other person that he interacts with. All of that just sheds a whole new light, and you kind of go from, okay, like I'm experiencing this with the character, I'm learning with the character, to, oh, like that's what was going on in this scene. Totally new perspective.
Well, and the pacing in that is phenomenal, because it starts off slow and, like you said, beautiful prose, and then all of a sudden it's just ramped up to 1,000. You're like, whoa, all these things are happening. I can't believe this.
I freaking adore that now. And like knowing kind of Clark was a writer who had been struggling, I believe, with chronic illness at that time, or chronic pain at that time. And that was kind of what inspired this book. And knowing that that's the start of it and just reading what she created out of that is beautiful. And I adore that novel so much. I was so glad that you brought it into our lives, Dylan, because you were the one who suggested we read it. So thank you.
You're welcome. I feel pretty, that's one of the books, you have some books in your back pocket that you're just like, ooh, like this one, I feel very confident. I can recommend it just about anyone. And Piranesi right there. I mean, I'm not surprised that it's made its way into the Christmas gifts.
It's a popular gift.
Yeah.
Specifically from Laura.
Yeah. If you're opening a present from me, it might be Piranesi. But Dylan, I guess I'll continue with the theme of books that you introduced us to. And
I bet I can guess
that. I would suggest.
I can guess that.
I can guess it
that's,
too.
That's Monstrous. I'm guessing, right? Which but I know you reread.
I've reread the series, I think 5 times now, but I think it's necessary, honestly, because it's so complex that you have to do these rereads unless you have like a super brain, which I do not. I cannot remember all these details and all the characters and all the different political things that are going on. So before each volume comes out, I plan like a couple weeks where I'm like, I'm going to reread all of Monstrous so I am caught up. And when volume 8 came out just in November recently, I did a reread and then I did a buddy read of volume 8 with a friend, and he was very confused and I knew everything that was going on. So I felt vindicated, but it's a fantastic series. I am so glad you introduced us to it because I cannot say enough good things about the world building and especially the art. Sana Takeda is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I will still remember that we did do a like buddy discussion with FTF and the 3 of us were very confused on how something in the world building worked, and like Charles just swooped in and told us, and we had just gotten done talking about how we never really like we read but we never really understood little intermission parts, and he was like, here's how it works, and we're like, how did you know that? And he's like, well, I read the intermission part, guys. Like
there's these little interludes with Professor Tam Tam, who is this adorable little cat, and a bunch of the world building is given in this and Hannah and Dylan and I were like, oh yeah, we kind of just skim those, and Charles was like, no, I take notes, so I'm a scholar and I know exactly what happened, and we were all kind of embarrassed.
Who knew?
I wish I had I wish I had in the room with me a copy of they're actually in a different room, unfortunately, but the artwork is so gorgeous, and it's as graphic novels go, like I've read some that, understandably given the format, are relatively light when it comes to the world building, doesn't get overly intricate when it comes to things like the politics, but in Monstrous you're just thrown into this world mostly through the view, at least at first, of the main character, who is this girl who is from I would say like an oppressed race, and she also, like you learn pretty quickly that she, not a spoiler to say what's going on with her, right? Like okay. You learn pretty quickly she's got like a monster inside of her, basically, and it is just the way that you deal with like themes of oppression, also the way that the world building's established and all these different races down to the talking cats and all that kind of stuff. It's just like a super like dark, grimdark feeling world, but that has an undertone of hope, especially with my favorite character, Little Fox, so like Fox Girl.
Yes, but I love Kippa.
She's amazing, and even just the way that's like illustrated, it works so well because it's like everything's so dark, everything's so dreary, and then they'll have her as this like she's wearing a light blue, if I'm remembering correctly, like most of the time, and it's bright around her, and it's like it really is a masterpiece, and it's one that I've reread too.
I've never reread them, and I'm often confused because I just go off vibes only, but they're excellent and you should reread them.
I'm often confused.
What can I say? Do as I say, not as I do, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, what could be a bigger endorsement of you have to reread this series than when someone's telling you that they're super confused, but still on the first read? You're gonna love it even more when you understand everything that's happening, like Charles and his big binder full of notes on the monstrous world.
Yes. Yeah. He has like a giant board across his bedroom, like, look, this is where it all connects. Like
all of Professor Tam Tam's lectures.
All right, well, this is a little bit different and a little bit of a throwback, but one of my favorite like fantasy novels of all time is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I adored this novel. She wrote this as a NaNoWriMo novel, and it is a like non-linear narrative written from multiple viewpoints about these two magicians who like make a bet to have two proteges who will fight against each other, and they do it via this like night circus that like pops up mystically all over town. And throughout time, these people sort of like weirdly start interacting through their competition and start learning more about each other, and could even maybe fall in love. And it's a novel that is incredibly atmospheric. Like you just feel what's going on around you. And there's just like the imagery in it is beautiful. And I'm like, it's such a gorgeously written novel. And it's so fascinating to see like two people try to communicate, kind of similar to like, This Is How You Lose the Time War, but much bigger. And it's a very, very well written novel. And like, I always highly recommend it because it's just one of my favorites of all time. I also listened to this book via audio the first time, and like to be able to reread or just listen to it like over and over again and let it wash over you. It's a huge comfort read. So always recommend a reread on that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's always good to have that book that you can go back to in times, especially if you're having like a reading slump or what have you, and you're like, okay, well, this I know I enjoy, and we're not always in the mood to take on something new and ambitious like Monstrous, let's say, or the Kingkiller Chronicle. But it's those comfort reads are great to be rereading. I wish I could add to the book. But
I figured it didn't sound like much of a Dylan right out of the gate. I feel like it's one that you should look into though. So a little different energy for you.
Next Friends pitching.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Night Circus.
Yes. Our next Friends pitching fantasy. Maybe I'll pitch it to Charles and we'll see if he selects it to be a next read. But one series that has been a victor in the Friends Pitching Fantasy series is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, or at least
my next one.
I did.
That's okay. So you go. So I'm so like, this is such a weird thing to say on this podcast, but be careful what you say, because I have it on good authority that I promised Laura I can't know anything about this series until we read it for the podcast.
Keep it really spoiler free.
Just you can do like a light overview, and Laura just like yell at him if he oversteps.
Yeah, but I'll scream.
Yeah.
Well, I've got more, so I'll leave that one to you, Laura, and I'll go with one of my favorite series and one that does not get enough credit, and that would be the Catherine Voyage Quartet, and that's by friend of the show Robert V.S. Reddick. I mean, this is a series that I always say this series is the reason why I am a fantasy reader at the level that I am right now, because when I was kind of getting back into fantasy reading as an adult, it was mostly Game of Thrones, like catalyzing this interest, like, like I'm really enjoying the show. Would I like the books?
Would awesome I like TV show? Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I never heard of it, but
I also like reading.
Yeah, I just around the same time, was like, I should read those books. And I started reading those, and then I'm like, there's this whole other genre, like this whole other, every book but Game of Thrones part of the genre that I haven't gotten involved with. And maybe I'd really like that too. So there's this site, and maybe it's still around, called bestfantasybooks.com or something like that. So when you're a total newbie like me getting back into it, you're like, let me go to bestfantasybooks.com and see what the authority has to say.
Yeah, they seem like they know what the best fantasy books are.
That sounds legit.
They wouldn't give them that URL if they weren't the master of all things fantasy.
Right. Sounds legit. Blue check
but
mark.
They had some books that, I'd never heard of, including at that point the Kingkiller Chronicles. So I was really not knowing what was going on but I did find what are good books that are recommended for fans of A Song of Ice and Fire. And this was one that came up, and I was like, oh, it sounds really interesting. It's like this group of mostly young human characters, but also ranging to talking rats and to go with the talking cats in Monstrous, although that could be a disaster to put those two things together. But
yes,
there's talking rats, there's these little warrior people, and all sorts of wacky monsters and mythological figures and gods and all that kind of stuff going on in this book. And it all, for the most part, takes place on this giant ship. So you're just on this giant ship with this cast of characters, but it's so big and expansive. It's like a world unto itself. And the series goes on for 4 books. Has lots of all the classic things you want in an epic fantasy, ranging from those monsters and gods and magic and all that kind of stuff, mages, to all these different settings you go to that are just completely original. Something we always talk about Robert V.S. Reddick's books is he thinks of things that leave us dude, what even goes on in your head that made you think of this?
I'm
and
concerned.
Also got I mean, good concerned. It's how is someone coming up with all of this stuff in one person's brain? Because and I think all that incredible world building is part of what makes it such an incredible journey to embark upon multiple times. And it's also got lovable characters. When I went to reread it, we did a read along with the author, with Robert V.S. Reddick. So we read each book actually with him and Under the Radar Books' Blaze. Yes. And we recorded episodes for each book. And that was a dream come true for me, because this was my first book, not Game of Thrones related, when I was getting back into fantasy. And I told Robert, I was like, yeah, if this series was not amazing, I don't know if I would be a fantasy reader. I might just be someone who's oh, I really like Game of Thrones, but I don't know if I like fantasy as a whole. But yeah, it was like coming home rereading this book and spending time with the characters. And also one of the most impactful and controversial endings that you'll come across. So I really like the ending, but it's very controversial.
What a fun little FTF origin story. There would have never been an FTF if you hadn't read that book series. So that's your comfort book read.
Yes,
I would say so. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's a good one. And yes, if you read it and reread it, you can join in on our Catherine Voyage read along, because those episodes are in our backlog anytime that folks want to do that. So read this for the first time if you haven't, and then read it again and again and again
and again
and again.
Reread.
And then that's enough. You could try something else, but then read it again.
What was that? Six times is enough.
It's really when you get the meatier parts of the novel. So
yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring up the 5th season again.
Okay. Be careful.
I'm going to try to be careful here, because I really need Hannah to read this, and I need her to experience all of the emotions that this book can evoke in you, because it's a lot. And this is a multi-POV story We even get some second person POV, which is interesting. And I have read very few books that do this, but it's a really unique world. And I literally gasped at times because there were so many twists and things happening within this story. And I've only read the first 2. I haven't read The Stone Sky, but N.K. Jemisin is doing all of the work here. It's such a deep book with so many themes, and I really can't get over how creative that book is. And I just cannot recommend it enough. I really am trying to just bite my tongue here so I don't spoil anything for Hannah, but highly recommend it. And I'm excited to do a reread whenever we cover it on our podcast and Hannah can read it.
Well, and I know I don't know anything about these novels besides, I believe, Dylan, you've read the third one, and I believe that has third person, right? Or am I incorrect?
Even the first book.
Okay. Just play around with tenses. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very unique book, and we've got Sam Kaplan saying, like, it's on another level. Not prepared for how mind-blowingly good it's going to be. And, like Jonathan Navarre saying how was just wow. 5th season was just wow. And that's kind of sums it up extremely well, because there are things that this book and series do that I have never seen anything like it. Like how she plays with format, and I'll keep it vague and high level about that, but how she plays with format and certain other things that she does are just something I've never seen before and haven't seen since in all my days of fantasy reading. And I think it's so hard to pull off some things that she pulls off. I mean, down to just like the basic of doing second person, like how brave that was to try to write a book with a hefty percentage of it in second person. But it works extremely well for what she's trying to do. And I'll not say much more because I'm respecting Hannah's.
I'm so sorry that I'm like closing off.
Don't be sorry, because
it's not the rule.
I need to see the video reaction of you watching it or you reading this, because it's just going to be so great.
I will say that I know very little about this trilogy other than I purchased it all 3 myself because I wanted to read these books. And I even pitched these books knowing nothing about them other than I was pretty sure that they were amazing. They did not win out in our voter selected choices, but they were books that I'm dying to read. And now I can't know anything about them until we cover them on the podcast. So, but I do know that her next book series, at least the first book, The City We Became, also has incredibly unique storytelling. I know a little bit more about that one because I have close friends who have read it, and they talk about like the world building and how unique she is in The City We Became. And so I can't wait to find out more about these books, and I can imagine that they're definite rereads. So
and they're great rereads. I mean, that's what I did in advance of our recording on it, and the way you get to see her building toward
everything.
Certain let's just say reveals is that there are reveals in the book, Hannah. I hate to
there are reveals, there are plot lines, there are themes.
Plot lines, themes. The way she builds towards certain reveals, you get to see really how masterful it is on the reread. And in the past, I used to say 3 Hugo Awards can't be wrong, but I won't say that anymore because I think we've learned certain things about the Hugos that suggest that maybe 3 Hugos or 1 Hugo or whatever could be wrong. But I will say N.K. Jemisin's books are worthy of any awards you can throw at them, legitimate ones.
Yeah, those are deserving of all the awards.
So my next pick is one I know all 3 of us read, and we talked about because I did a buddy read with Dylan, Namina Forna's The Gilded Ones series. So this is a little bit of a spoiler for, I mean, it's announced on our podcast, but we're having Namina on the podcast next week. So we literally just got off our recording with her. And in preparing for that, I reread both the books, and on reread, I think rereading these books is well worth it. These are YA novels about a girl, Deka, who is part of a pretty like patriarchal and oppressive society who girls, when they become quote unquote women, have to test their purity, and if they bleed gold, they are seen as demons, and they suffer the death penalty. And Deka finds out that she is one of these people, but she gets the opportunity to become a warrior and fight against these death shriek creatures that are like ravaging their society. And she learns a lot, and she learns that there's more that meets the eye in both books. And I reread these books, and there's so much plot to these books that you don't see the first time. There are so many like deeper and darker themes. And after talking to Namina, like the way she built these books was so interesting and intricate that I really think even for a YA novel, like these books are incredibly serious and deep. And I remember, Dylan, when you and I first started reading them, we were both like, YA ? Because it hits pretty heavy pretty early on. And so I think after rereading these books over the course of like a year, they're well worth a reread.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was ridiculously impressed by how she tackles some of those big picture themes like patriarchal societies, oppression, and it's just how you can pack that into something that is also as accessible as it needs to be a young adult novel is just like really amazing. I'm excited to check out your interview, and it sounds like some of those things can be appreciated even more on the reread when you're not like being floored that certain things are happening that you just did not ever expect to happen.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of shocking things that happen in that series.
Where all of a sudden you're like, wait, who can't I trust now? And you're just like the next page.
Yeah. So that's a great pick. That interview is going to be top notch, I'm sure.
Hopefully.
It was great to talk with Namina. She was fantastic.
We were both fangirling by the end of it.
All right. Well, let's get into a series that I actually didn't really love on my first read, and is a classic of relatively modern fantasy, but it's starts with Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. It's a Farseer trilogy, and it is definitely one of those pillars of beloved epic fantasy books that kind of like set the tone. It was published in the 90s. Okay, set the tone for a lot of modern fantasy. You can see its impact on people like Patrick Rothfuss and doing the Kingkiller Chronicle and all of that. It centers around a character named Fitz, who is a prince's bastard, and he basically just his birth, they call him the catalyst because it just sets off this chain of reaction where like the whole line of succession could be messed up, and the next in line for the throne has to just like leave and go into obscurity because he it was his kid, and all these things happen. Then he gets kind of embroiled into the politics of a society that he doesn't understand at all. And he's this character that is like known for being a bit of a doormat. So I guess T.M. Kaplan, oh God, Robin Hobb writes the most deliciously painful character work. Bender in here saying, wow, love Hobb, but I just can't reread it. My heart cannot withstand that again. That's a good point. So for me, it was like I read this book relatively early into my entrance back into fantasy. So I'm like a bastard of a noble embroiled in politics and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you mean Jon Snow? And it's nothing like Game of Thrones or anything like that, even though the premise could seem that way, because it is it's like a character study of this one person who is he feels so real, and in that way it can be super frustrating at times because he's being relatively passive, like lots of real people are. Like most people are not like Jon Snow. But it's frustrating when you're coming in and you're expecting maybe something more action packed or something with more drama. It's just, no, you're kind of going to sit with this kid in his life, and maybe there'll be certain moments that really stick out as being dramatic, but most of it you're just going to be, even if you love the books, you're going to be screaming, Fitz, why Fitz, why do you do this to me and you? But it's my first read, I was screaming that internally, and I was also like, I don't get it, like I don't really get the hype. And it took me years before I went back and reread it. And then I was like, oh, this is actually masterful. And it's actually really impressive to write a story where you are this close to, like, it's a first person single point of view. You're this close to the person and you feel like you know him this intimately. And to write an interesting fantasy book that is not based in just like swords and giant battles and warfare, but based in character and just relationships and subtlety. And Robin Hobb is just such an incredible writer, and the way that she builds characters and relationships is like pretty much unmatched. That being said, if your heart can't take a reread, I understand that. So if it's more for the folks who have read it and weren't sure about it, because there are a lot of people you'll see who will say like, I don't get it. Like, I found this really boring. And for those of you, it's like, I understand. I was one of you, but you can
but
change.
You're wrong.
Well, I'm going to delve into some cozy fantasy and go with a super hyped book that's deserving of all the hype, and that's Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I've reread this 3 times now, and I adore it. It's just the ultimate comfort read, and the whole atmosphere, and Travis Baldree is just an excellent character writer. Chef's Kiss, that book is phenomenal, and I can't recommend it enough. Like, if you need something just to kind of feel good or to relax with, the audiobook is great, and also the print version is great. So you can't go wrong with format.
I mean, Laura loves Legends and Lattes. I will admit here on the record that I did prefer Bookshops and Bone Dust, which I kept calling Bone Shops and Book Dust before an interview, which was very scary. But I also very much enjoyed those books. I think that they're amazing.
They're so good.
I love Viv so much. What a great character.
Viv is phenomenal.
I just love reading about someone who just wants to open a coffee shop and will do it. Just
Baldree has like such a knack for making like simple things in life seem so important, and just I love that. Life doesn't always have to be a big battle or a big quest. You can just have an ordinary life and it can be extremely important and meaningful, and I love that about his writing.
That's so cool. I mean, I've seen all the hype, of course, like it, and it's great to hear that it lives up to it. It is
absolutely
interesting. It's definitely, I mean, if I was sitting there not that long ago being like, the Farseer trilogy doesn't have enough action for me, I think it's probably another step toward the cozy fantasy to be like, okay, I have to just be okay with the fact that these characters, they might be in a fantasy world, but they're just gonna open up a cafe, and that's all right. Like, for me, that mentality is huge, and I think sounds like the cozy fantasy fits perfectly for a comfort read type of situation.
Yes.
Beth Taylor, Laura, said that Assistant to the Villain is even more cozy by Hannah Nicole Mayer. So you should definitely write that down.
I'll have to check that out, because I do like cozy fantasy. We read Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons by Quenby Olson. That book has my heart. I love it so much.
Good. Oh, what a good book. This is a little bit of a weirder book to say that I would reread, and definitely not cozy at all. But I'm kind of obsessed with the backstory of this book, and I would definitely reread this in a heartbeat. It's a novella. It's called The Deep by Rivers Solomon.
Yes.
It is incredibly interesting. It is about it's a book that is based on the fact that like sorry, I have to be careful with how I speak on it, but like it was born from a song that was created for This American Life, and then it became a novella about what happened to African slave women who were tossed overboard when they are coming over to the Americas. And it is incredible, not exactly cozy. And then in this book, it kind of reimagines where they become like a type of mermaid almost. And all of their pain and trauma goes into one individual mer person pretty much, who takes on that memory for them and their need to escape from it and escape from this. And it's written in such a unique and beautiful way that like it's so melodic because it was born of a song. And River Solomon is an excellent writer. And like they go on kind of self-discovery and kind of how to find oneself in the world and try to like relieve yourself of your trauma and then to re-experience it when you know that it may harm others and everything. It's beautiful and it's great. And it is very lyrical, as Beth Tabler said. I'm glad someone else has read one of my books because I feel like I keep pitching books that people are like, have not
I have read that as well, Hannah.
Okay.
I have read that as well. I completely agree.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and I love reading it, and then I love like listening to like David Diggs rap to it. Like everything about how this book was built is amazing, and so like I want to reread this novel. I want to listen to its backstory at all times, and I adore this one.
All right, the two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum of great reread books. I like. There's like the cozy. This just I want to experience this over and over again, and there's the like this has so much that I need to chew on here that I just have to give it another go. I need to be re-traumatized.
Could describe Laura's energy versus my energy.
Oh my.
That's pretty fair.
Oh no. What does that say about us?
I don't know, but it says worse about me.
All right. Well, hard to follow that, but I would be remiss as a member of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast if I didn't start talking about the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. Yeah, I mean, like King Killer and First Law, they're pretty much my favorite series out there. So it's tough not to feel like they apply to everything, but I do think that First Law applies very well to the reread, which it's a little bit tough to talk about without spoilers. Have you two, either of you read First Law? I thought you had.
I've read the first and the second one, and then I got the third one from the library, and I forgot to read it, and then I had to return it.
You forgot. Either way, the series. Well, I'll do my best without spoilers here. But First Law series, probably most people are familiar with it. It's like one of the go-to grimdark recommendations. It follows several characters, including Logan Ninefingers, who's this barbarian who's trying to leave his bloody past behind him. It's got Glokta, who's a torturer and for some reason one of the most beloved characters in fantasy. And it's got a whole other slew of great characters. And yeah, Beth Tabler, of course, has never heard of the First Law series in her time running Before We Go blog. But it's so it is grimdark, but it's also really funny. And I think like that's something that helps you like deal with the more dreary side of things, as Joe Abercrombie's voice and his wit shines through, and it's going to hold up no matter how many times you read it. And the biggest part of why First Law is great upon a reread is these. First of all, the first three books in the First Law series, like the First Law trilogy, they're basically like one big book. Like they tell one complete story rather than like wrapping up a complete story with the first book. Like Hannah, you could probably speak to having read The Blade itself. It's like this whole book feels like a build up to something that doesn't necessarily end up happening. So
it builds up to them departing on a journey.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, kind of in that old Lord of the Rings model of how to start a series. But most series nowadays, people oftentimes are looking for that like standalone with sequel potential, which means like I can't stand these
standalone
effects.
with sequel
They're
potential.
So
Yay.
annoying. Yeah, that's because that's the peace sign. That's what I don't know what I said, but it's a big disturbance. But I think that
the continuation potential of all three novels and how they work together.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, the idea is we have basically these character arcs that all kind of add up to Joe Abercrombie's like thesis, if you will. And the ending can take some people by surprise, but and some people are dissatisfied with the ending. In fact, like Charles, who's one of Abercrombie's biggest fans, like the first time he read, he was like, I didn't really like the ending. And then we went back and we reread it, and you kind of understand what Abercrombie is building toward. And Charles basically had a moment of like, oh, I get it now. And I won't say more about what the ending is, but seeing all the character arcs and what they're building toward with the ending in mind, and knowing certain characters, how they, their motivations might not be clear at the start, but they come to be clear later on, like changes everything. It's a totally new series on the reread, more than basically any series that I've talked about today or that I've read.
I mean, the FTF podcast is experts on the Joe Abercrombie oeuvre.
This is known.
We like to think so.
But I did enjoy my read of those. The first two books I will continue on at some point in time. But I do like Abercrombie as someone who is a master of like trying to play with certain archetypes and really like dive into them and turn them on their heads or find different aspects that you wouldn't normally see in a character like that. And that did read through on my first read through, and I can only imagine what that does on the second or third read through where you know where they're going. Yeah. And so you can see how he's playing with them, because I do think he is someone who knows the set, the first book is set up to the second book. And I'm sure the third book is, the payoff and the resolution of all of those aspects. And I do think he probably knows what he's doing, and he's someone who definitely has that in it. So I would be interested in rereads where I kind of know what to expect and I can just see it all play out.
Definitely. Obligatory Sanderson and Malzahn. I have them on my list, but I have Mistborn and Malzahn on my list.
Laura looked a little scared.
That seems really deep, and I don't know if I'm ready to tackle something that long.
Malzahn, me neither.
I mean,
I've read the first story. It's dense. Me or Sanderson? Sanderson, I've read almost everything, but Malzahn, I've read the first three and knew what was going on about 20 to 30% of the time.
Laura and I have only read the Robert Jordan Brando Sandos.
Whoops.
Whoops daisies.
Ultimate dishonor, apparently. Yikes.
You have to read Malzahn 3 times to understand 70% of the content.
I don't have time for that.
It's tough. I mean, it's a series that, like, the fans of Malzahn are intense. Like, they love it more than life itself. And you start thinking, okay, there's got to be something here. And they reread it more than like any fan base rereads any series. So I mean, it's hard on the first read, which is why it does make a lot of sense to reread. But it's 10 books, and it's like the longest. It's longer than Stormlight Archive all put together. It's longer than Wheel of Time all put together, like all 14 Wheel of Time books. Like, it's significantly more words than that. So it's
that's
tough.
Scary.
That sounds like too much.
Look, I don't reread books. I went on.
Let alone to reread all of that. Yikes. That would be a
3
lot.
times. Like, that's a lot of rereading, guys.
I will say, if you're switching formats, though, like, I don't know if I would reread The Wheel of Time in print, but I love the audiobook narrators, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. So I would definitely listen to those books again on a reread.
I would say the same. I would re-listen.
So if that's
to The Wheel of
if that's
Time.
the case for those long series, maybe if they have really good narrators, I can see that. But really long series like that.
Everyone says like don't audiobook Malzahn because it's just the first book alone. So I just pitched the first book to Charles as part of Friends Pitching Fantasy. So we'll see what he ends up selecting. And he was daunted by the task. And I believe that's my choice if Charles pitched Dune to me. So
I'm only laughing because I didn't realize Laura was answering that question for the Friends Pitching Fantasy because Bender just put any sci-fi recommendations and you were just chit-chatting.
It works for both.
Like, Dude,
wait, what were you trying to answer?
That was really rude. She was trying to do the Friends Pitching Fantasy one, but I thought she just saw the comment, got really excited. Was like,
but I do recommend that, actually, Dune.
For some sci-fi rereads, I also loved Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. Excellent sci-fi, so good. Lots of like, there's aliens, there's donuts, there's demons. That doesn't all seem to fit in one, but like you definitely want to read it. Also Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, automatic rereads because Laura adores those novellas.
Yes, I want to make those part of my personality somehow.
I live with someone who like has reread them like multiple times. Those are so easy to read. Laura,
the Murderbot Diaries. If we would be remiss if we did not mention the Murderbot Diaries. Those are extremely consumable. They're definitely perfect for rereads.
Martha Wells is amazing. Just the character she made in Murderbot throughout the course of the series is just undeniably amazing. Laura,
I would also say Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky would be great in a reread. I loved the first book and I'm making my way through the second book right now. And these are highly creative books that take you in directions that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be going. And so I would definitely recommend Children of Time.
Laura disagrees with me here, but This Is How You Lose the Time War, one of my all-time favorites. Oh, there we go. There it is.
Hey, Hannah, I have reread that one.
Oh, you have reread it. But
I read that book 3 times. I still don't know what happened.
No, literally holding the book out of view, being like, when they stop talking, I don't know. Talk about This Is How You Lose the Time War.
I love that book. Ahead, it's Anna. So good. No, go ahead. I will not. We were talking too much about sci-fi recs because we got so excited.
No, this was my sci-fi rec. I mean, it's not hard science fiction, but it's definitely more sci-fi than it is fantasy.
I would agree.
It is, that. Yeah. I described. Let me see if I can remember what I used. I described it as. Spy versus Spy meets Romeo and Juliet in a like if it was surrounded by like a war based on 2 like different factions trying to control the fate of time. So that is This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's an epistolary novel, and it is just one of the most beautifully written books. It is a story too that the only times I really see people not liking it is
Laura.
Like when people are Lord, did you not like This Is How You Lose the Time?
I can't say if I liked it or if I didn't like it. It didn't work with my brain. Like it doesn't work with my brain chemistry. Like I've literally listened to it twice and I read it once.
You reread it.
I have reread that book, so I guess I can recommend it as a reread.
Times. Yeah,
but
or I literally not recommend it if you didn't like it.
Yeah, I guess I liked it. I don't know. I don't know what happens, so I can't say. I didn't know what happened, Dylan, until I listened to you talk about it on FDF to explain it to Charles, and I was like, "Oh, so that's what happened." I had no clue.
That was a spoiler-free episode. I guess I did a bad job.
I mean,
she needed
the summary. I had No clue.
I read the back of the book and you're like, oh, that's what happened.
Also,
should have got the paperback. I had the ebook.
Also, guys, for science fiction, if you've never picked it up, it's the weirdest, smallest book, but like it's called Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I'm obsessed with this novel. I recommend it to people all the time as well. It's about a woman who like goes on a like deep sea diving exposition, or not deep sea diving, but she goes into the deep sea like on a mission, and she comes back changed, and it's like a discussion between her and her wife between what's going on. It's kind of like you don't know what's happening. She feels like she's changing, and it's like a very weird and haunting like exploration of like love, loss, and grief. And it's such a weird novel, but I adored it so much, so I highly recommend that one for sci-fi as well.
And I'm surprised you did not say Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer.
Oh my gosh. Well,
that's one of your faves.
Hey, you just want to bring it up. Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I am obsessed with Jeff Vandermeer. He's my favorite. Yes, thank you. Annihilation. It's so freaking good. I have read like almost all of the books he puts out because I'm so obsessed with him. Annihilation is just one of those weird little science fiction novels where you read it and you're like, what did I just read? Let me pick it up and read it again. And then you're going to reread it again.
You want to reread it again just to be like, I guess I need to figure this out more. Like,
but okay. Will I? No, because that's the point. You're never going to figure it out. Yep. And it's awesome. But you want to reread it so many times to like find out what you missed or what went on. And like his prose are like so amazing, just the way they meld with your mind and they make you feel like really disturbed, but really like satisfied. It's such a strange, bizarre, like it scratches my brain in just the right way. I'm obsessed with that series. When Laura started reading them last year, I was like super excited because I never get excited about friends reading books that I love that much. But I even remember the specific time and place I first read those books in. Like I was like in a specific bar in Chicago and I would just like read them by like barely any light, but I loved them that much that I just needed to have them like in my soul. So those are great rereads. Obsessed. I've never seen the movie. I don't know if it's worth it because I'm so scared. So did you like the movie at least? I heard it's more like horror than anything else, but
it was weird. Like it was beautiful. Like then at the end, I was just kind of like, what?
Like that
was my reaction.
That sounds similar to the reading experience.
Exactly the book you read.
Yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes I'm not always the best with that. Like I want some sort of. I'm okay with ambiguous endings, but I'm not okay with like. I literally do not understand at all what is even being implied by the like. What are even the possibilities of what just happened?
We have some questions about like there's a movie. Yes, they whitewashed the main character into Natalie Portman. So make sure you're like looking up that stuff because she wasn't white.
I didn't realize that. I did not realize that.
Not great. But and we have Bender saying the movie was bad. So I've never seen the movie because I was scared. But I love that series though. It was beautiful, but at the end I was like, what? That's exactly how you feel reading the books, but in the good way, not the bad way.
Can I throw out one more sci-fi rec? Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
Oh yeah.
It's so good. So good. I can't say enough good things about The Martian and Project Hail Mary, but Project Hail Mary just really hits my cozy heart. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's weirdly heartwarming for the premise of someone like at least at the start, like just lost in space with no memory of how that even happened, like slowly getting their memory back.
The best friendship created. Like, what an unlikely duo. I love it. So good.
Yeah.
Oh, and then
for audio, by the way, I'll say.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Like Beth as a rec. But Hannah, you were saying?
I was just gonna say Beth wanted to throw one out there, and it's like throw one out, go for it. But yeah, I have not listened to anything by Andy Weir yet, or read anything by Andy Weir, but I need to.
You should, Hannah. The Martian and Project Hail Mary are some all-time faves.
Nofic Gloss.
Nofic Gloss.
I know.
I wish Beth were video here, so I'm sure she could provide a lot of info about it. It's Nofic Gloss.
It's called Calden's.
Sci-fi?
It's a planet. Their planet is destroyed, family is gone, and his only hope for survival is a crew of misfit aliens and a mysterious ship that seems to have a soul and a universe of its own. I'm sold.
Ooh.
I'm sold.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I'm ready to read it and reread it. So thank you for the suggestion. So,
nice.
Yeah. All right.
Well, folks, that was a ton of fun. I gotta say, Hannah,
play that
Laura,
sweet outro music.
Yeah,
Dylan.
we don't have. Well, we have the even sweeter outro music for SFF Addicts.
Your new music is so great. I love it. I'm always like jamming out to it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to discuss rereading. I think that we get to know some people's favorite books. Like if you're willing to give it another go after already reading it, it's like you must either really adore this or be in pure what mode,
or be confused as Laura was, but this is how you use the time.
Or you're just trying to figure some things out.
Yeah, but it's always a delight. I'm always happy when I get the chance to collab with you two. I also thank you so much for being available on short notice. You two are my heroes, so I'm very thankful. Yeah,
thank you so much for having us.
We appreciate you asking us.
Yeah.
And where can people find you on the wonderful World Wide Web?
Yeah, well, you can find us at ourpod.com. That's OWWR Pod for On Wednesdays We Read. You can find our episodes on on anywhere you get your podcasts, and we can be found on on the app that will not be named, and on Instagram,
artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. And on Blue Sky and on Threads at OWWR Pod. So just
and Instagram too. We're more active on Instagram, I feel like.
Yes, we are. We are the most active on Instagram. So check us out there. And where can people find you, Dylan?
Great question. They can find us at the FDF Podcast 1 on the artist formerly known as Twitter. And you can also find us at the FDF Podcast on Instagram. And if you're viewing us on YouTube and you're wondering where are all the YouTube videos for Friends Talking Fantasy Podcasts, I'm sorry, we no presence on here. So if you want to listen to the podcast, your favorite podcast app like Spotify, Apple Podcast, etc., should be able to find us on there. But you know what? Just listening to this episode is more than enough. And thank you all for actually tuning in live. That's super cool to get to interact with you all, and we're really grateful.
Tons of fun. Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. This does.